Good evening. Hello there. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Scott Monroe. I'm the managing editor of the Morning Sentinel, Kennebec Journal, and centralmaine.com. And I'm here tonight with Amy Calder. The reason we're here, Amy is celebrating 35 years with the Morning Sentinel. Just incredible, Amy. And we're so happy you came out tonight to share this with us. We're looking forward to lots of stories about your time with the Sentinel. Just so everyone knows, so I have a couple of questions for Amy that I'll go over, but I really want to open it up to you as well. So I'll be going around after with the mic and would love to hear your questions for Amy about her time with the Sentinel.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all for coming. I'm really humbled. I work for a great company, the Maine Trust for Local News. Our CEO, Lisa DeSisto, is here, and she's the best. She takes care of all of her employees, and I think it was her idea for doing this, so I really appreciate that. And I want to thank Colby, and I also want to thank the Schupf Center and Waterville Creates, and Scott, our managing editor.
Thank you. Yeah, as Amy mentioned, so this is part of our Maine Voices Live series, and we've been very fortunate to have Colby College continue to sponsor that series for us. We're excited to continue to try out new locations. This is our first time here in the downtown Art Center, so this is really cool. And we really appreciate the opportunity to present Amy here tonight. She has so many awesome tales that have been passed down to the newsroom folks over the years, and you have a book, of course, as well. Comfort is an old barn.
Yes.
So tell us about that, Amy, and about how that's been going for you.
Wow. We have a really good, the Maine Trust has a really good relationship with Islandport Press, which is based in Yarmouth. And the book is a collection of about 70 of my columns that I've written over the years, separate from my news writing. You know, I mostly am a reporter and cover the news, but I also write a column which comes out on Saturday, and I can basically write about anything I want. I can be a little more creative, you know, sort of take a departure from the who, what, when, where, and why, and write about my childhood or, you know, something that I see or some interesting person that I meet. So my husband and I went over about 1,000 columns to pick out the 70, that was a task. But we chose the ones that we thought people might be interested in who live in central Maine or people who haven't been to Maine and might want to know what it's like. And it's in 3 parts. The first part is growing up in Skowhegan. I grew up in the 50s and 60s in Skowhegan. The second part is called On the Beat, different things that I've come in contact with. And then the last part is the people I meet. And then there are transition essays between the 3 parts. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun putting it together.
And you started your columns about 15 years ago, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
So how did that come to be?
Oh, my. Well, I had written a column many years ago when I was in the Skowhegan Bureau, but they weren't very good. And I did that for maybe about 7 years, and then let it go and, you know, really got into the news. And an editor 15 years ago, George Myers Jr., said, "Hey, would you want to try doing a column again?" And I said, "Oh, well, okay," you know, and I thought, you know, I'd write 1 or 2, and if it worked, great. If it didn't work, you know, I'd go back to doing all news. But I really found that I really love it. I love talking to people and finding out about their lives, and feel very privileged that they allowed me into their lives to share their stories. And some of them are just amazing. You know, the stories that people, everybody has a story. Like I always say, everybody in this room has a story. And let me sit down with you for an hour and a half, and you'll tell me stuff, and it might be the last question I ask you that is just, it's an incredible story. And that's what I'll write about, is that last thing you tell me. But everyone has a story. You may not think you do, but you do.
And for me, that's always been the thing, you know, when I think about Amy's writing and I think about, you know, why is it resonates so strongly with people? And I've said this before, Amy just, she has such an empathy for everyone that she talks to, and you connect with people, especially in your columns.
Thank you, Scott.
How do you do that?
Well, I think I hadn't thought of this before, but my mother was a registered nurse, and all my life when I was little growing up, people would say, your mother was so good to me, and she was so empathetic and so thoughtful about things. And I think that's where I learned, and from my father also, but just to listen to people, because everybody's important, and everybody has something that's worthwhile. And I ask people questions that I think the public would want to know. When I interview someone, I think, what is the reader over on North Street wanting to know about this situation, or this fire, or this accident, or this city council meeting? I think about what the reader wants to know.
So let's turn back the clock a little bit first. So you went to the University of Hartford.
Yes.
Majored in English.
In English, yep.
Okay. And then you went to Massachusetts after that, right? At Amherst?
I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my English degree. I think I wanted to be a writer. I really wanted to do journalism, but I think I didn't have the confidence. So I thought, well, if I go back to school and get certified to teach English, then I'll always have something to fall back on. So that's what I did, and I got certified in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to teach secondary English. But my last semester, I did the student teaching, and I decided, nope, this is too much work, all weekend long, grading papers and commenting on essays and editing is not my forte, even though I was the arts editor at the college newspaper. And I said, it's all consuming. I don't know how teachers do it. And I decided to go into journalism, and I never looked back. It's been the most rewarding career ever. I describe it as like going to school every day and getting paid for it. It's a wonderful profession, and you help people, you help to educate people, you help people to be aware of things that are happening in your community, so it's great.
So what was it like when you started off at the Sentinel? How did that come to be? And do you remember some of the things that you did to start off?
Yep. I was a correspondent first. That's like an independent contractor. We had these little, we called them a Trash R80. It was a little rectangular computer-like, but you could only see 3 lines of copy. So you had to remember what you wrote and then add to it. And you had to keep remembering what you wrote for the last 3 lines. It was something. And it made you had to plug it into the phone jack, and it made a crashing sound when the story got sent.
Sounds like dial-up.
So my first beat was this town of Norridgewock, and I covered the CWS landfill and all the controversy there. That was a long time ago, yeah.
So you went along here as a stringer starting off, and then
Yes.
how did the full-time
Oh,
role
I
come to be?
quickly became a full-time staffer and worked out of the Skowhegan Bureau with Darla Pickett. She was wonderful, God rest her soul. And then they moved me down to the Waterville office, which was on Silver Street in the concourse parking lot. And I covered a variety of beats, I think, and then I went back to Skowhegan, and I was the bureau chief for 7 years there. Covered everything from, you name it, fires and accidents and murders and all kinds of things. And then eventually came back here in, I think it was 97. And in fact, I remember when they tore the building down, I wrote the story on it, the Silver Street building, and then there was a tent there where our building is now, and they were celebrating the opening of the new building. Yeah.
So I'm sure you've talked about this before, but
I can be long-winded, Scott, so you have to cut me off.
it's all good. You've seen a lot of change in your time here, of course. So we think about the '90s and then the advent of the internet.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So
yes.
what are some thoughts that you have on the changes that you've seen over the last several decades?
The news business, the news gathering business has changed tremendously. When I was covering news in Somerset County, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have car phones. I might be up in Jackman somewhere riding around on an old potholed road and covering a murder or something, and I had to call an editor, and I would have to knock on someone's door and say, "Hi, I'm Amy from the Sentinel. Could I use your phone?" And people were they were really gracious. They'd let me in. Surprisingly, I don't know if they'd do that now, but I remember we didn't have a fax machine. So if I needed some court paperwork from California, I would have to write a letter and then wait for about a week for the documents to come back. So when we got the fax machine, oh my God, I thought I died and gone to heaven. You'd get it instantly. And you know, when the internet first came, I remember doing a story about a guy in Skowhegan. He was in a little building down by the great eddy of the Kennebec, and he said, we're going to have this thing, it's going to be like the information highway, and you're going to be able to send a message to someone in Russia and get a response within seconds. And I thought, okay, yeah, right. But I wrote the story, and now, you know, I think about that, and I think he was absolutely right. And in this building over here, when we first got, we were allowed to use email, there was one computer in the library that we could use for email, and you had to wait in line. I remember one executive editor telling me and another staffer, you're using the email too much, he said. So, which is what we do all day now, basically.
It's interesting. I think about, you know, so you've seen those changes and many others over the years, but some things really have remained the same a lot. You know, I think about just the other day, we had this tragic crash over on West River Road, and you headed out there and talked with folks on the scene. So I think about, you know, a lot of the elements of what you do really, you know, are the same as they have been. What are some of those constants for you about the basic building blocks of being a journalist?
Yeah, and I think that's really the only way to really cover something well, like a fire or an accident, is to be there, or a standoff, is to be there and talk to people. That was a particularly tragic crash on the West River Road, and yeah, there are stories that stay in your head. That stays in my head. Yeah.
Speaking of standoff, so we have a couple of clips here I want to go through. I asked Amy ahead of this event, what are some of the most memorable stories that you've covered over the year? So we pulled some clips here that we can bring up and take a look at, and hopefully this works. It's not working. There we go. Okay, clip number one.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Amy, this man was taken into protective custody after a 8-hour standoff with police at the Waterville Police Department.
Yes. My husband, Phil, who's in the back up there in the orange shirt, remembers this particularly well because I was gone all night long, and I was starving, and asked him if he would go and get me something to eat and bring it to me, because I was parked where the Elm is, not the former American Legion. The police let us go only so far. It was a guy who, he had some emotional issues because he got into financial difficulties. And he drove to the Waterville police station, and he was going to shoot himself. And he called the police and told them he didn't want to do it where he lived because he didn't want his family, he wanted it to be away. So we ended up, the police negotiators worked with him, and it took pretty much all night, and they finally got him to give up. And after he got help and after he kind of recovered, I did an interview with him where he explained the whole thing, and he was really grateful to the Waterville Police and state police who helped him to get out of that situation. I haven't been in touch with him recently, but he was doing really well, and he was so thankful to be alive.
And as this was unfolding, I'm sure you didn't know what you were getting into.
No, we didn't. I mean, he had a gun. He was in his pickup truck at the police station, and they wouldn't let us get real close. You know, I think they were worried for the public and worried for him and themselves, and yeah, but that was a good outcome in the end.
Get closer.
It's another constant in the news business. Things don't
Technical
always go as
difficulty.
planned. That's okay, you can wing it sometimes. Let's see.
Well, we'll just do this the old-fashioned way.
Okay.
I made printouts.
He's prepared.
All right. So this is a recent column of yours.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that one.
River Catruch. We got a report that there was someone in a school bus parked at the junior high school. This was fairly recently. Let me just put my glasses on. That was in March. And nobody really knew anything about it except, not even the superintendent actually didn't know much about him. But he was found dead in a school bus. They called school off. It was very traumatic for everyone, the staff, the students, and there was no information coming from anywhere, and the police couldn't really reveal anything. So I said, you know, can't just let this person go unknown. So I did a lot of digging, and I did a lot of research, and I got on the internet. The internet is a great thing when you need it. Sometimes it can be not so good, but I found friends of his, I found family members, they talked about him. I say him because he was transgender. And I learned about the struggles. He worked at Walmart and Hannaford, and his boss at Hannaford spoke to me anonymously and said that, you know, he came out to her and the other workers, and they were really supportive, and gave him a new name tag and everything, and just, he was just really conflicted, and people were so devastated by, I should say, their death. And, but I learned a lot about this person who was a very caring, thoughtful, empathetic person who died too soon, you know, and I have to think that if they had had more help, that maybe they would still be here today. But I remember the superintendent saying thank you because he didn't know much about him either. And then the bus driver who went that day responded that he actually went to the bus garage early in the morning every day to start the buses because it was cold, and he found him, and he was really devastated by it, and it still haunts him today, I think. But you know, some of the things, this guy came from miles and miles away, like over near Paris, Norway area.
And we had a lot of response to that column. It really struck a chord. Next one we have here, the ice storm of '98. Anyone remember that?
Storm of '98.
So, of course, it was all hands on deck for the ice storm of '98. But Amy had a nice clip here about how folks were getting by in shelters.
Yeah, I went over to Colby College, had the field house open for people to come, and they had Red Cross workers and some nurses and doctors and things, and just interviewed the people who were staying there. What I remember about the ice storm is I was living in Skowhegan at the time because we had electricity and nobody here had it, and I felt really bad for my coworkers. Some of them slept in the lunchroom at the Sentinel. But one day, we had to go down, we all had to go to the Kennebec Journal, our sister paper in Augusta, to write stories because we had no way to write them here. And I got down there in the crowded Kennebec Journal newsroom, and Mike Sexton was the publisher at the time, and he came up to me and he looked at me, and I thought he was going to say, gee, thanks for coming, and instead he said, you've had a shower. Remember that. I remember driving down there, it was like nuclear winter. The trees, and it was all ice and broken trees, and you know what it was like, and it was an obstacle course getting down there. I took the West River Road. I'm fortunate that I made it, but the thing I remember most about the ice storm is I began to think in the newsroom, what haven't we covered? And I thought, how do funeral homes handle no electricity? Because people still die. It's a ice storm, but people are still dying. What are they doing with the bodies? So I called around to a few funeral homes, and oh my goodness, I wrote this story. Without electricity, they had to do embalming by gravity, so sort of like a, what do you call those? IV drips. They had to do that. And they didn't have elevators, so they were climbing up and down stairs with coffins and doing services by candlelight and meeting with families by candlelight. It was the most bizarre thing, but they did it. They had coffins piled up in the garage and in the basement, and So anyway, that's.
Well, and it's interesting too. I mean, you're experiencing it like everyone else, and at the same time, you're writing about it and trying to figure out different angles. So that that must have been interesting trying to juggle those two things at the same time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was quite a time.
So we're here right now in the Paul J. Schupf Art Center, and you interviewed Paul Schupf.
I did.
As I recall, you wrote a story when he revealed that he had cancer.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk about your interview with him and what.
Yeah,
that was
he
like.
lived in Hamilton, New York, and he was a great art enthusiast, and he gave artwork to Colby and did all kinds of stuff for Colby. He went to Colgate University, and he was, I think, also was a donor to Colgate, but he really loved Colby because way back in the 80s, when Bill Cotter was the president at Colby, he talked with him about contemporary art, and he wanted to give a museum some contemporary art like Alex Katz, I think it's Katz. And he talked to Colby and Bowden wasn't interested, but he said Bill Cotter was so enthusiastic. He said, yes, we'd love to have this stuff, and Paul Schupf became a benefactor for Colby, and I think gave money for the Alex Katz wing. But then he loved Waterville so much. He had never been here. He just happened to come here in the 80s, and he loved Waterville so much. He came here 3 or 4 times a year, and he would go to Colby events, and he met David Green, and they had like a 2-hour lunch, and David said, well, what would you think of having a building downtown with art? And Paul Schupf said, I love it. And he ended up giving the naming gift for this building. And when I think of, every time I come in here, I think of him because he so loved this city, and he loved art, and he wanted art. This was the big thing. He wanted art to be accessible to people, all people, not just people who are wealthy or people who are educated, but everyone, and he wanted it to be a place where people could come and go as they, and which is really something because young children get everything free here. I mean, there are all these programs and films and all sorts of things. But yeah, he told me he had stage 4 cancer. Yeah, and he did die. I think it was 2019. Yeah. But he and David Green developed this incredible relationship, and then he gave the gift here, and so here we are. Look at this.
Another one of your clips, Amy, if you want to take a look there. Margaret Chase Smith.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a couple back here, but
Was that a column? Because I wrote stories about her too. But she was from Skowhegan, as you all know. She was the first woman from a major political party to be nominated for president. She grew up in Skowhegan, where I grew up, and my young life, I would see her riding in this big blue. Was it a Lincoln, Phil? It was, I think. Anyway, she had someone drive her. You couldn't see over the seat because she was so little. She was so cute. And I would interview her. She was something. When you talked to her on the phone, when she was ready to hang up, she didn't say, okay, goodbye, have a good afternoon. She'd just say, okay, click. And when she was on her deathbed, this was 1993, I believe, at her house on Norridgewock Avenue, and her nephew was there and her staff, and she was expected to pass away, soon, and so all the statewide and national news people were camped out in her parking lot right next to the house, which is also the library, the Margaret Chase Smith Library Center. And so this went on for days, and she didn't die, and she didn't die, and they were all waiting, when is she going to die? She didn't. And so they finally, like after about 5 or 7 days, they just cleared out. And I was the only one there, and she died. And she actually worked for the Somerset Reporter. It was a little newspaper up in Skowhegan many years ago. She was the only one there, and I had my trusty black and white Pentax K1000, and I took a picture of the hearse leaving the center and covered her funeral on this big sloping lawn by her house and interviewed, Ed Muskie was there, and Brennan, Governor Brennan, and Curtis. Yeah, that was an error.
And one of the biggest cases that we've had here at the Sentinel has been the disappearance of Ayla Reynolds.
Yes.
Now, you didn't write the initial story because it happened on a weekend, and the person
I was on medical leave.
Was it
Yeah.
was it Doug?
Yeah, I think Doug Harlow.
Doug Harlow wrote the initial story, but
Rest his soul. He was quite a go-getter for a reporter.
but you've gone on to write
Yeah.
the story for us year after year, and we at least make sure we write an annual story to update what's happening with the case.
Right.
What's that been like for you over the past decade?
Well, for those of you who don't know, and you probably all do, Ayla Reynolds was a toddler who disappeared from a house on Violet Avenue in Waterville. She was being cared for at the time by her father, and her mother was in Portland getting some treatment. And he reported her missing on December 17th, 2011. And it ended up being the most costly investigation in Maine history, police history, state police history. So Ayla today would have just turned 14 in April. And every year I interview her mother right around December 17th. Trista, who lives in southern Maine and has 2 little boys and a partner who helps. He helps a lot with the kids. But every year I interview her, and every year, it brings it all back. She lost this child, and she has no idea where it is. And the police say that the people in the house that night know more than they're saying. So they say a judge declared her dead, so she was able to, get a death certificate or whatever. But she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know what happened to her. And the police tell me, I stay in touch with the state police crimes unit, and every year they say they've gotten so many leads, they're confident it will be solved, but it takes time because there's no body, and that makes it difficult. But they think that somebody will talk at some point.
Spoken with the mother, Trista, quite a bit.
Yes,
As well.
Trista, yeah, she's really grown and matured a lot in the last 12 years. She works full-time, works hard, and to take care of her other 2 boys. And, I think she's gotten a lot of therapy, and she maintains. I've become quite fond of her just because I talk to her every year, and I have this connection with her. Yeah.
On a lighter note, let's talk about dead crows.
Oh, good.
So
Yeah.
this is one of your columns.
Yes.
And this was probably one of your favorite ones, right?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. It's one of my husband's favorites, and he says, don't say it's one of my favorites, but it really is. Would you like me to read it?
Go for it, yeah.
I would love to read it because, first of all, it came about because one winter day at our house in Waterville, I went out in the backyard, and there was this beautiful mound of snow, and there was this dead crow with the feet sticking up in the air, and I thought, geez, why? I've never seen a dead crow like this. Why would this happen? So I called Doug Hitchcox from Maine Audubon, and he gave me all kinds of reasons. It could have gotten hit by a car, hit the window, or gotten poisoned, or whatever. But then I thought, well, gee, maybe I could search around the internet. Maybe I could get a column out of this. So I talked to all kinds of people, even in places like England, and they'd say, oh, it's a harbinger of death. You better watch out. Other people said, oh, no, it's a good luck sign. Well, anyway, I wrote this column, and after I wrote it, I really got a good column because this woman who I know named Nancy Foster, is Nancy here, by the way? Nancy Foster of Waterville called me up, and she said, Amy, you should really talk to my cousin Lee Bureau about crows because he had a crow, and oh boy. So, let's see, what page are we on here? Waterville's top bird. Crows really are fascinating creatures. After I wrote a column about a dead crow I found in my backyard, I received lots of interesting comments from people relating their own experiences with crows. However, none were more compelling than the story I heard from Nancy Foster of Waterville. She said that in the early 50s, her cousins Joy and Lee Bureau had a pet crow named Smokey, and he was smart and mischievous and so well known about town that when he died, his obituary appeared on the front page of the Morning Sentinel. Smokey wreaked havoc with the police as he was always stealing parking tickets off car windows in downtown Waterville, Foster wrote. I remember that he would fly into Woolworths and pick up a sparkly bracelet and fly away. Stores back then didn't have air conditioning. Doors were commonly left open. I hope they have air conditioning this week. I had to know more about Smokey, so I called Lee Bureau, and we had a good long chat about the crow, who was a celebrity in Waterville. Bureau's sister Joy befriended the crow who had fallen out of a nest. At first, she kept it in a cage where she fed it and talked to it every day and taught it to say hello, Bureau said. Smokey then learned other words, much to the amazement of everyone, and he recognized faces, particularly those of Bureau family members. The family lived on North Street. Lee Bureau, who was 15 at the time, slept outside in a tent all summer, he said. He had a newspaper route, and he had to get up at 4:30, and Smokey would act as his alarm clock, flying into the tent every morning and pecking and pulling at his blanket. If that didn't work, the crow became more aggressive, said Bureau, now 80. He'd jump right up on my head and take his beak and stick it in my ear like there was something in there, Bureau recalled. It was just a riot, 4:30 in the morning, and he gets me up. I'd get on my motor scooter and he'd ride on my shoulder. I'd go over the North Street Bridge, and there was something about it he liked. He'd spread his wings and disappear, and I kept going. I'd see him off in the distance. He'd play games. When I'd slow down, he'd come back, and he'd be on my shoulder, and we'd be eye to eye, and he'd make funny noises. The bird was amazing. He knew my paper route better than I did. While Smokey lived on the Bureau property, he also flew around town and especially liked Rummel's ice cream stand on Silver Street. People would feed him. They didn't know what to make of him. He had quite a vocabulary. People just couldn't believe it. He flew all over the city. People would call up and say, "Hey, Lee, your bird's over here. He took clothespins off my line." Sometimes Smokey would remove clothesline catches, which caused people's sheets to drag on the ground, according to Bureau. He liked little things, eyeglasses, nickels, combs, shiny things. He had a secret place down by the high school, a 3-story apartment house in the eaves of the building. Everybody kept saying he's got his stuff up there, but nobody dared to go up. Bureau's father, Harvey, finally got a 40-foot ladder that reached up to the spot, and they found the stash, he said. There were safety pins and earrings and little chains and all sorts of things. Bureau's father, Harvey, finally got a 40-foot ladder that reached up to, they found the stash, sorry about that. Smokey loved raw hamburger, and when he got hungry, he'd fly home to get some. Bureau said the crow could see a hamburger from a long distance. One day, the crow plucked $200 in cash from Bureau's father's t-shirt pocket as he was talking to the local football coach in the driveway and flew up to the chimney on the roof next door. Fearing Smokey would release the money from his beak and drop it into the chimney, they took action. My father said, "Quickly, go get some hamburg." So I ran in the house and got some hamburg. Smokey saw the hamburg and dropped the money, and the money was rolling down the roof. One of the most amazing things about Smokey is that he knew what classrooms Lee and his sister attended all day at the old high school, now Gilman Apartments on Gilman Street. He'd land on the windowsill and peck on the glass, Bureau recalled. He knew where my sister was. My French teacher was scared to death. I said, "Don't be afraid, it's just my pet crow." I went to the window, and he'd walk back and forth on the windowsill outside and then fly off. Bureau credits his sister Joy, who died many years ago, for spending so much time with Smokey that he became part of the family and could learn to talk. Smokey, who was Bureau's best buddy for about 3 years, ultimately met a sad end in 1952. It was winter, and the crow lived in the garage when it was cold, but as temperatures dipped to 15 below zero, the family got worried and put him in their cellar where he would fly around, talk, and play games, according to Bureau. But one day, he pecked open a bag of ready cement and ingested some and died. The family was devastated, Bureau recalled. I was really bent. I didn't realize I could be so attached to a crow. It was sad, it really was. Smokey was featured in the Morning Sentinel several times. A photo with his front page obituary shows then police officer Joe Pliska directing traffic on Main Street downtown as Smokey struts across the street. There's people that remember him to this day, Bureau said. They see me and they say, aren't you the guy that had that crow? So many people have their own stories about him. He was absolutely amazing. Crows are so smart. You wouldn't believe the things that Smokey would do. Carry a twig a long ways and hop up on the table to give it to me when I was doing a project. It was quite remarkable. I had so much fun with that crow. Recently, Bureau went to Wendy's restaurant on Main Street, and there was a group of crows walking around. He saved some of his hamburger for them, and he looked one right in the eye and talked to it, he recalled. I could see my crow, he said. They're such beautiful birds. Poor Lee passed away a couple of years ago, but I mean, whoever would imagine, right?
Who would have thought? Another really interesting tale you have is going around and handing out $100 bills to folks in the city. Tell us how that came to be.
Wow. Yeah, this is unbelievable. A few years ago, someone started sending me checks and said, I trust you to give this to the charity of your choice or what you think most needs it, because I think he thought, or she thought, that I was in touch with people who might need stuff. So, you know, the first year I think I gave it to the Humane Society. I think it was $500 to the Humane Society, and then I've given, you know, and then they just kept coming. Every so often I'll get a check in the mail with a typed letter, no signature, and it's a bank check, and he wants me to give it to. So I think very hard every time I do this, and I gave some to a woman up near Newport who had a lot of kids, and she got booted out of her house, and she had no place to go, and she was working full time, and she was so good with these kids, and just really struggling. So that was like around Christmas. Phil and I drove up and we gave it to her. This Christmas, I got a check for $1,000. So I said, I'm going to do something different. And I think it's always been a wish to do something like this, but it gave me a chance. I cashed it for 10 $100 bills, and I went around the city to try to find people who I thought could really use it at Christmas. And went to the South End, and there was this couple working on a pickup truck, and it was a rusty old pickup truck, and I handed them the money and just said, this is from someone who I don't know but wanted me to give it to somebody. And they were just stunned. I mean, it's an incredible feeling to do this. There was a woman up in the apartment complex off of Upper Main Street, and it was a grandmother, and she was pushing a stroller, and she said, you don't know what this means to me. I have grandchildren and I have no money for Christmas. And I mean, people would cry and hug me, and I mean, gee, it's the most incredible feeling. And the only thing I can say about it is I hope that people do the same thing as this. I don't know if it's a man who sends this, I'm not sure, but he knows me, he reads my stuff, and he keeps sending this money. It's incredibly generous, and I don't know what else to say.
Ever think you'd be doing that as a journalist?
No, and normally we wouldn't be doing something like that, but times
Pretty
have
extraordinary.
changed. Yeah.
Well, we got a handful of audience questions that I'll ask now that were submitted prior to the event here, and then I'll go around, and if you want to raise your hand and ask Amy a question, that would be fantastic. So first one we have here, do you have plans for another book?
No, but if I were asked, maybe. Yeah.
Another 1,000 columns, maybe?
Yeah, you know what I'd really like to try is a work of fiction, but I don't know if I have what it takes to do it. It's a lot of work, and you have to be a certain, like Jerry Boyle. Jerry is so creative. I worked with Jerry for many years.
Well, that reminds me, we didn't talk about Empire Falls.
Oh, Empire Falls.
Yeah. So
Oh,
you have some interesting stories about when they came to film up here.
Oh my gosh. That was a film, not Netflix. Was it Netflix? Yes, it was Netflix. Paul Newman, Ed Harris. The box office here is named the Ed Harris box office because he came, I I interviewed him. He got an award for the film festival, and he gave money. He gave $75,000, I think, toward this center, and so the box office named it after him. Anyway, oh, the time the film crew came to town. The first scene was over at Winslow at Bee's Diner, Little Bee's restaurant, and Ed Harris and Paul Newman looking like an old scraggly something or other. It was so much fun covering that. They had scenes at the Bobbin over here, at the Hathaway building, and one day in the book there was a school shooting, and they called it Empire Falls High School. This was the setting for Empire Falls. So it was over at the Waterville High School, and Dave Leeming, our photographer, and I were there because we were covering this like every day. It was just great. And the director came up and said, "Hey, we need someone to play a photographer and a reporter. Can you guys do it?" And I thought, geez, I don't know. I don't think so, but yeah, I'd love to do it. So I called up my editor, who was, I think it was Glenn Turner at the time, God rest his soul. And he said, yeah, go ahead. So we played a reporter and photographer. Ed Harris comes in a police cruiser with, I don't remember the guy's name, played the cop, the police chief. Oh, he just died recently. Anyway, so we had to run around this police cruiser, and then there were these cops keeping us back, and we ran around. We did a whole half day of running around this police cruiser. And finally, they said, okay, time for lunch. We're going to have lunch in the cafeteria. So Dave and I, we said, we better get back to the office and start writing. And he wanted to, process his film. And we started walking down the road, and the guy came after us, and he said, you can't leave. And we said, we can't? He said, no, we're going to shoot all afternoon. You're going to run around the other way around the police cruiser. So we did. And this was an all-day shoot. And I think you see us for like 2 seconds.
It's a couple seconds, yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit. But I always show it to my friends, and I say, that's us right there. That was unexpected.
We had two people actually thank you for your coverage of the South End Neighborhood Association back in 2000, 2001. Want to talk about that coverage?
Yeah, South End Neighborhood Association. What an incredible group of people there. I think Kim Halley may have been the first person to run it, but there were some issues happening in the South End with drugs and different things, and they really wanted to. So South End, first of all, is a historical place in the city that the turn of the century, a lot of people came down from Canada to work in the mills, and it was really a going concern. There were shops and gas stations and grocery stores and really, really thriving South End. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside over the years. And these people in the South End wanted to really perk up the South End and make it better. And by God, they did. They met every week, and I would go to all those meetings just because I felt so invested, and these people were working so hard, and they slowly would make improvements. They got a police department to have a South End police officer dedicated to that part of the city. And as time has gone by, journalists focus less on covering meetings and more on issues. But I have always been one to say that's where you get your stories, by going to these meetings, these council meetings and planning board meetings. It's where you find out about developments, and you never know what's going to happen at a council meeting. Right, Rebecca? Rebecca Green, the chair of the council, is here. Right, Rebecca? And she's sitting with Karen Heck, the former mayor. She knows, too. Yeah. So that was a long-winded answer to a quick question. But
They just appreciated your coverage.
well, thank you, South End. Yeah, it's nice.
The next one here is, given the collapse of many journalism outlets, both local and national, what gives you hope when you think about the future of your industry? What advice would you give to aspiring storytellers who want to be paid for their work?
Oh, boy. If you want to be a journalist, you're not going to get rich, but you're going to have a really rewarding career. If you want to read a lot, read every day, everything, and you want to really love people. You have to really love people, and you have to be really curious about things. Journalists, I think the Maine Trust for Local News, thank goodness they purchased us and the other papers in our group. Maine Today, which was Maine Today Media. They are really invested in making sure that local journalism stays alive. And we all know what can happen when you don't have a news outlet, a local newspaper. I mean, we're the eyes and ears for everything that happens. Government is, I think, more honest because of newspapers. The Maine Trust for Local News is part of the National Trust for Local News, and they've been buying up newspapers around the state that really show promise. And I think they really were impressed with the way we operate and what we do, and that we're so passionate about what we do. And they're able to fund us not so much, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong about this, not so much for hiring people, but for training and making sure that we're sustainable. And yeah, so I think we're very fortunate.
All right. I think we have time now for audience questions. Anyone have a
Karen.
question for Amy?
Hi, Karen.
If you want to just raise your hand, I'll come around and bring the mic to you.
You're next.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Mary, right?
Yes.
Hi, Mary.
Do any of your giveaways from this anonymous donor result in stories?
Well, actually, yes. I wrote about the woman with the children. I had written a story about her, a news story about her, the woman up in the Newport area, St. Albans, I think she lived. I had done stories about her, and then when I gave her the money, I don't know if I wrote a column about it afterwards, but when I handed out the $10, $100 bills at Christmas, I did write about that because it was so moving to me to see how people reacted and to realize how important it is to these people. You know, they may get funding from some places, I don't know, the state or what, but to be able to actually have some money in their hands that they can go and buy Christmas presents with or food, it was really, really heartbreaking and heart-wrenching and heartwarming for me. So I did write about that. Yeah, thank you for the question.
I think we had Karen over here.
Thank you. First, I want to say to everybody here, please support the Maine Trust for Local Media, because we are so lucky to have a local paper when there's another one 20 miles down the road that could easily be combined. And to have stories like Amy's and to have really local attendance at the council meetings and at planning meetings and at local organizations, it is really incumbent on all of us to be supporting that with your money. So if you don't have a subscription, please get one. And if you have one, please make a donation. So
Thank you, Karen. You can come and work for us.
What I wanted to say to you, Amy, is how much I appreciate the fact that you give voice to people who don't have voices. And I think of our friendship with Peter Michaud and his obituary. And the people living on the banks of the Waterville, the river, and people at the soup kitchen, and really letting people who are in this community know that they are part of the community. We are also, we have responsibility for people who aren't as lucky as many of us are. And your stories really illustrate that it's not just a choice to be homeless, that there are a lot of factors that go into why somebody ends up living on the street. And I can't thank you enough for giving voice to those people instead of just the, rich and famous.
Thank you, Karen. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Other questions for Amy?
I don't really have a
Wally?
question, but just wanted to comment on, I just read your column from last Saturday about the road washout in Mercer, and it just says how caring the community is for each other, and it's actually inspiring, and it would be, it'd make a really good short story. Fiction.
Thank you, Wally.
But
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I enjoyed being there. Ms. Bruce?
Thank you, and it's Bruce White. And so, Amy, when I first got elected at the State House, they said to us, reporters are friendly, but they are not your friends.
Okay.
Now, I feel a lot differently than what they said. I feel you're a friend. You've been very fair over the years. As when I was on the planning board, I've seen it at council meetings, even state issues, and you don't just try to trick people and grab one sentence out of context. And you give, if you take a sentence, you really capture it. And I'm always amazed at, like, when I was on the planning board, all this stuff. And an hour later, she's got a story up. And I'm like, I'm just fascinated by it. And always appreciated your fairness. And again, not trying to trick somebody, pull something out of context. And so thank you for that over the years.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So now I'll ask a question.
Okay.
How has it changed, from when you started covering council meetings, planning board meetings, right? Paul Mitchell was on way back in the, a few years back, right? And Paul Lucier when I was serving, and so how has that changed over the years? Some of the dynamics or
A big
reporting?
change is that all the members of the planning board are younger than I am. I noticed that they all seem like young people to me. How has that changed? Oh. People that serve on these councils and planning boards and different committees are just really selfless and dedicated people, and they really care about what's happening in this city. They really do. And after you sit meeting after meeting, you realize that. And I guess that has not changed. Yeah, it takes a lot of time, more than just going to a meeting. They're doing site walks and just researching and reading reams of documents about different issues in the city. The settings have changed. We've gone from, they used to meet in the basement of City Hall. Then they met in the second floor of the center here, over there, somewhere here. And then they met at the Elm, and now they meet at 46 Front Street, which is a real nice space that the city, what's that? And Chase Forum, exactly, until the pandemic hit. Right.
Don't forget Zoom.
Oh yeah, Zoom. Oh, that's a big change. Yeah, Zoom. Thank you, Bruce.
Other questions for Amy or memories perhaps you want to share?
Hi, Kim. That's Kim Halley, who I was just talking about. You started the South End Neighborhood Association group, right?
With a whole lot of help. Thank you.
Yeah. This woman right
I
here
was-
is something else.
Thank you, Amy. You mentioned Peter Michaud, and I recently was thinking about him and thinking that John Morris was maybe chief of police at that time, and I think had cared about him, right? And
Yes.
And as I recall, he moved to Augusta.
He moved to,
Or can you? Because I didn't see the obituary. I'd be curious to know.
yeah, Peter
thank you.
Michaud, many of you might remember him, would walk around town with a big hat, wide brim hat, pulling a cart, often with kerosene tanks, and he had a machete by his side and boots, and he would walk to the end of Common Street and bow to the east. And he would go to the police department, which was in the basement of City Hall, and he'd walk down 2 or 3 steps and go to the glass window and say, "Permission to come aboard, sir." And John Morris, the police chief, would say, "Permission granted," because they both were in the Navy. Peter had some emotional issues. He was a very bright man. He had a college degree, an engineering degree, and so forth. He lived in the trees down by C.O. Beck and Company, and I did a story there. Literally, he had outdoor rooms that were like these little paths. He lived in this little small tent, and he used this kerosene heaters to stay warm. He did not want to live in a home. He loved being outside, but eventually he had to leave there. He ended up going to, he had chickens that he had in the trees, and he named them French names. And he had so many eggs that he would give them away to people. Anyway, he ended up going to, I think, a shelter in Boston, and then he went to Canada at some place, and he wrote letters to me for quite some time, but then his obituary was in the paper just a few years ago, and that was revealing. I wrote a column about that because his sisters in the obituary, he had several sisters, and they spoke really warmly of him and had said he had his struggles in life, but you know, he was now at peace. And yeah, so he did die. But he was one of these people that they were always here, and you know, people sometimes were afraid of him. They'd call the police and say, "There's a guy with a sword here." And he would go to council meetings. Karen, you might remember this. He would go to council meetings, and he'd talk about some issue, and he'd start to get riled up. And John Morris, chief, would go and stand next to him, and that's all it took for him to calm down, was just to have him go over. John Morris was he became the commissioner of public safety for the state, but he was really a community-minded police chief. Even though Karen would have her political debates with him out in the Castonguay Square back in the days, but he really cared about people, and especially people who were, you know, had troubles. He would support them and advocate for them. It was quite remarkable to see that at council meetings.
The one thing that was really fun at council meeting, because this was after 9/11, sometimes he'd be at the council meeting, and he always had his machete, but he would put it on the chair, and then he would get up and talk. And because it was a town that people knew him and appreciated, just knew who he was, that was okay. Because after 9/11, people were very scared about people with any kind of implements of destruction. And that's what I really do still value about Waterville, is that, you know, there were so many people who would be walking, the waving man,
The cross man?
the cross, yeah. And I hope that we can continue that feeling of these people are part of our community, and so not being afraid of them is important. They're more afraid of us most of the time.
Thanks, Karen. Sid Geller. Hi, Sid.
Amy, it's been a pleasure being a friend of yours and Phil's for many, many years.
Thank you. Likewise, thank you.
I recall being in Florida one day, and I got a call from a friend in Portland saying that I had died.
That's right.
It was in the newspaper. And so I said to my wife, I've got to call Amy, get this straightened out. So I called you, and you said, send me a picture. And,
Oh, my gosh.
and I sent it to you, and you did a column on it.
I was very happy to write a story about the fact that he indeed was not dead. That was something. I don't know how that came about. Do you?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. My son David went into one of the local banks, and one of the tellers said, gee, I am so sorry about your father. And he said, why? What happened? And he said, well, he died. We found out it was my friend Wheeler, who was also an attorney, Clyde Wheeler, who had passed away.
Oh. Oh. Father died.
And so that's how it was. The first card that we got was from the mayor, from Paul.
Paul LePage was mayor, right?
And Paul told me the same thing happened to him. But anyways, I thank you for straightening it out.
Oh, my God. These are the things you just can't make up.
You set the record straight.
Yes.
Other questions?
Roger.
You are a gifted and talented storyteller and writer.
Thank you.
I think we all know that. I'm old enough to remember the Clayton Laverdiers and the Eugene Letourneaus. How much of an influence were they on you in your writing style?
Oh, they were, I was down here and they were up here. They were admired by so many people, and I remember, oh, Phil has a funny story. I did a story, Clayton wrote a book called, what was it called, About Town or something, and it was a collection of his columns, and he was doing a book signing in the conference room at the Sentinel, and I wrote a story about it, and Gene Letourneau came in. Gene was, he was great too. Those guys, Gene covered the ice storm of what year, Phil? He was the only person that could get to, the Sentinel. He lived up on Hazelwood, and he walked down to the Sentinel and kept the paper going. What was your question? Influence. Well, they were always there. They were just so, they loved what they did. That's the thing. They were smiling till, and they worked the Sentinel for many, many, many years. Phil remembers that day that he did the book signing, and something happened where I think Ron Maxwell was there, one of the photographers, and it was either Gene, they both had books, and they were signing each other's books, but they signed their own books or something. It was just really funny because they were quite elderly at the time. Phil knows the story, and it's hilarious. But they were really devoted, dedicated journalists, both of them. Yeah.
They were at least 35 years.
Oh, more. I think Clayton was there for 60, maybe, Phil? Yeah, Gene was there from 1929 until the 90s, I think. Yeah, really. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for sharing tonight. I just want to say, so pleased to be celebrating this occasion with you. You're a mentor to so many in the newsroom, myself included. And Waterville is just so lucky to have you. And we hope you stick around for much longer.
Thank you. I'm humbled and honored. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
So we do have copies of Amy's book over there if you'd like to get a copy, and Amy will be hanging out to sign your books if you would like that, and to talk some more. So thank you so much for coming.